Hello YouTube. I thought I'd just show you some albums I've been spinning recently in today's video. Some of these are records that I'd half sort of earmarked for one of my more themed videos, my hard and heavy obscurities, or for my Pomp rock one, that kind of thing. And they've been hanging around since then. They didn't quite make the cut for those videos, not because they're not good, just because they didn't quite fit into the categories. So there's a mixture of those sort of things and just some other stuff I've been spinning. So we'll get started with this album. Came out in 1975, and it's the one and only album by Dog Soldier. And the first thing to say about that is what dreadful sleeve art it has. I mean, fairly badly executed picture of a Native American riding a fighter jet. And this was a band that was put together by Keith Hartley, who he'd been in the Artwoods, he'd played with John Mayall, had a pretty successful solo career of his own. And who else had he got in here? Oh, Derek Griffiths on guitar, who'd also been in the Artwoods, and he'd been in Satisfaction, kind of a progressive, slightly horn rock band. And there's a guy called Paul Bliss. Don't know a lot about him apart from that he went on to have a solo career putting out fairly lightweight West Coast AOR type material. So, you know, there's a band here, great chops, really good bunch of musicians. But there's a problem with this album, and that's that everyone in the band writes, but they don't write together. So they're bringing all these disparate ideas in, and nobody seems to have thought that perhaps they should have a band sound rather than buying a load of solo material at a group album. So even though I thought of this for my hard and heavy obscurities video, it just isn't consistently hard and heavy. It starts well. First track, Pillar to Post, has a kind of bluesy, Bad Company, Deep Purple vibe to it. And the vocalist, who I don't know who takes lead vocals on that track actually, but he's got quite a sort of like a James Dewar type voice. The guy sang on Robin Trower's best solo albums. So it starts really well, really encouraging. But elsewhere, we get, well, there's a track, Giving As Good As You Get, written by Paul Bliss, which is just that kind of unremarkable West Coast AOR that he seemed to specialise in later in his career. I mean, there's some great guitar playing on here. There's some vaguely funky moments, particularly second track, Several People, which has a really nice sort of, what sounds like a sitar on the intro. And like I say, it's vaguely funky, but it's fairly smooth West Coast type rock. Probably has more in common with the Doobies than Deep Purple, that track. And nothing wrong with Doobie Brothers, but I don't want to feel like I'm being chucked all over the place when I listen to an album. There's no consistency on this at all. The track You Are My Spark has some great organ guitar interplay. Not prog, but there's a lot of ideas on there, a lot of jumping around. Some great harmony vocals as well. But again, part of the problem with that track, and something that crops up all the time in this album, is that the performances are probably better than the songs. There are exceptions. The final track, Looks Like Rain, it's 11 minutes long, and it has a really dirty kind of Iron Butterfly Inagada Davida guitar riff to start. There's some nice meandering synth on it, a hard bluesy vocal, some great harmony vocals, and that is probably the highlight on this album. I mean, fortunately it's the longest track as well. Some really good wah-wah guitar on it, thunder and rain sort of sound effects. That's the track to look for if you're going to sample this album, I think. It finishes in a sort of gorgeous, trippy free-for-all. But on the whole, I can only cautiously recommend this album, and that's if you cherry-pick the best songs. I do find it a bit strange that Keith Hartley, there he is in the middle there, seems utterly obsessed with Native American culture, and he's wearing some of the Indian beads there, and obviously the artwork there. And the guy was from Preston, Lancashire. Okay, if that's what he's into, that's fine. But he did seem to have a habit of dressing up in Native American gear. Is that cultural appropriation? That's what they call it nowadays, isn't it? So there you go, Dog Soldier. Cautiously recommended. And next up is one that so nearly made it into my favourite Pomp rock albums. But again, listening to it before putting that list together, it just didn't quite fit. It is definitely Pomp in places. But elsewhere it's more straightforward AOR, probably in the Survivor mode. And that's a self-titled album by Steeplechase, which came out in 1981. Interesting cover art there, featuring some sort of neon horse UFO hybrid. And even though this didn't quite fit in the Pomp category, this is a really good album. I love this record. It starts off really well with the track Only You Love, Only Me, which immediately brings to mind bands like Shooting Star and Boston. It's really good, Pompy AOR, great vocals, superb harmonies, nice keyboards. And the quality is pretty much kept up for the majority of the album. There's tons of tasty synth soloing on here. But having said that, not enough. And I suppose that's one of the problems with this album. The synths seem a little bit bolted on rather than having been thought through at the writing stage. So where they are, they're great, but they don't take a central role, which is probably why I wouldn't consider this a Pomp album. I think the main reason for that is that there's not actually a keyboard player in the band. All the keyboards are played by guest musicians. So I guess at the writing stage, they weren't really considering keyboards as a lead instrument. So you don't get the massive kind of Greg Giuffria keyboard intros and that kind of thing that would really elevate this album. I feel bad saying that because, like I say, this is a brilliant album. It's just not fully a Pomp rock album. But it is great. Elsewhere, apart from the Pomp elements, you've got those kind of brooding, mid-paced rockers that bands like Survivor and Foreigner were really good at in their early years. Like I say, there's a couple of throwaway tracks on side 2, and I was starting to think perhaps all the good stuff's on side 1, but no, it finishes with the 2 best tracks, and they are Find Your Way Home, which is has a nice Pomp synth intro. After saying there aren't any synthesizer intros, that one does have a really nice synth intro. There are gang chorus harmonies, some real technical drumming. It's probably the most Pomp track on the album, in fact. And the final track, Rock and Roll Appetite, is pretty pacey, has an insistent heavy guitar riff, some real crisp technical drumming. The synths sort of sound like a horn section on this one, but the best part about this track is the sort of climactic guitar synth vocal outro, which is really worth hearing. So there's musical chops aplenty on here, superb lead vocals and harmonies. I just wish the keyboards had been in at the writing stage, because it could have just made this album an all-time Pomp classic. Steeplechase. And next is an album that I first saw this back in the mists of time when Mrs. Shelf Stacker was just my girlfriend. And I remember we were in a basement of some grotty dive record shop in Camden Town. And I saw this, I think it was £1 or something. And I thought, yeah, I'm getting that. Showed it to my wife and she was like, nah, looks a bit naff. I thought, what are you talking about? I'm amazed we survived that, to be honest. Ian Lloyd and Stories, or just Stories as though previously known. And this is the third of 3 albums. It's the first one that doesn't feature Michael Brown on various synths and keyboards and harpsichord and mellotron and all the rest of it. Michael Brown, of course, was in the Left Bank, so he brought that baroque pop feel to their first 2 albums. And there's still elements of that on here, but probably less so. I mean, they did replace Michael Brown with a guy called Kenneth Bichelle. So he plays a ton of keyboards and synths and the rest on here. So you still get some continuity in the sound, but I think they were going for a slightly more commercial sound anyway. So you get a feel of... My cat's calling me. Hi, Lily. So you get a feel of, I suppose, a slightly proggy Babies on this album. I mean, certainly Ian Lloyd's voice sounds to me like a cross between perhaps Rod Stewart and John Waite. So that would certainly tie in with the Babies feel. And I guess proggy elements come from the length of some of the tracks, the instrumentation. I said less of a Brock pop feel on this, but I mean, how could my wife see this album and not think, my God, that looks cool? I mean, look at this gatefold. I mean, wouldn't you buy this album based on that band photo alone? Well, I did. And guess what? I was right. It's a really good album. I mean, definitely there are proggy elements. Things like the Moog synthesizer that sort of snakes in and out of the track Soft Rain. Again, you've got the track Hard When You're So Far Away. Features a lot of harpsichord. And that really reminds me of, or certainly the intro does, of Golden Brown by the Synthesizers, by the Stranglers. Makes me wonder if the Stranglers had ever heard this before they wrote that track, because it's definitely reminiscent. There's slightly soulful elements, some sort of what sound like black female backing vocalists in parts. And this band, if they're known for anything really, are known for their cover of Brother Louie, the Hot Chocolate song, which was on their second album. And it's not really representative of their sound, but they do return to that sort of soulful pop feel on the track Mammy Blue on here. Decent track, not my favourite, but yeah, that's definitely in that sort of Brother Louie vein. On the second side, I Can't Understand It is a quality power pop track. It's the only way I can describe it. It sounds like something that would have definitely hogged the UK singles charts in sort of 1979. It's got that real kind of vibe to it. And the track Earthbound / Freefall is a real atmospheric, spacey piece. It sounds like it's based around the chords of Goldfinger, the John Barry James Bond theme. And it's great stuff. The whole album is really good, and Story's back catalogue is all great and really worth checking out. I'm surprised I haven't shown them on the VC before. I should have done, and perhaps I'll show the other albums at some point. But this isn't a bad starting point, to be honest. Great stuff. Stories. Now, I think I've said before that I'm always weeding through my record collection, picking out stuff I haven't played for a long time with a view to ditching it if it doesn't pass the audition when I play it again. And this is one I fully expected would be going in the purge pile. I haven't played it. I thought, actually, this is quite decent. This has got a reprieve. I don't know whether it's a temporary reprieve or a full-time one, but it's Trampoline. Now, these guys were from Switzerland. This album came out in 1981. And the first thing to say is, what a dreadful looking band. This guy looks like Mr. Bean. This guy needs to shave his head. This guy looks like Julio Iglesias. This guy looks like he should be in Frankie Goes to Hollywood. I'm not quite sure what to say about this guy. But yeah, if you've got a band that looks like that, you don't stick them on the cover. You get Roger Dean or somebody to put together a decent album sleeve for you. I do like the band logo though. I think that's pretty good graphic. But it's not about what the band looks like, is it? Otherwise I'd have to chuck away half my collection. This is decent stuff. I mean, they actually had a number 7 hit in Switzerland with the song Gonna Make It All Right, which someone has helpfully highlighted there. It's not a highlight. What it is a Euro trash earworm. It's kind of like a heavy version of Smokey or something like that. And it's not particularly representative of the rest of the album, but I guess it did all right for them in Switzerland. Anyway, I don't know how many records you have to sell in Switzerland to get a number 1, or number 7 even. But the rest of the album is radio-friendly hard rock with some sort of new wave angularity. The singer, to me, has a bit of Billy Squire about his voice, which is okay with me. I'm a fan of Billy Squire. There are plenty of punchy choruses on here, some strong backing vocals, chunky riffs, wailing guitar, some simple, hard-hitting drums. Don't really know what else to say about it. It's a decent album. It may not survive, a second purge, but we'll have to see. But if you're going to check it out, I'll check out the tracks Hooked on Love and My Way. Probably the highlights on here. But yeah, look at the state of them. Trampoline. Now for a bit of Psych. And this is an album that came out originally in 1970. So they're a little bit late to the party, really, for psychedelia. Came out on Peace label originally. Very small time label. And original copies go for, treble figures. £200, £300, £400 a time. So I've got a 1983 reissue on the Psycho label. And the band is the Posies, and the album's Cosmic Mind at Play. First thing to say about the Psycho label is that even though they did really pretty decent quality reissues, they had the ugliest reissue label I think I've ever seen. I mean, there's nothing remotely psychedelic or even vaguely visually appealing about that, but the pressings are good, so that's the main thing, I guess. The album itself, it's been suggested in some reviews that this is exactly the kind of band that Frank Zappa was taking the piss out of on Only in It for the Money, and it does sound, particularly the fact that this came out in 1970, that they were bandwagon jumpers to an extent, and they weren't quite sure what kind of a band they were. There's deep psych on here, there's pop psych, there's garage psych, there's fairly straight pop. But what I will say is it's a really enjoyable album. I love it. I mean, it starts off with the title track, Cosmic Mind at Play, which sounds to me like it's ripping off the Sgt. Pepper riff. But has a vocal that sounds like the Rolling Stones' We Love You. So if that sounds like your bag, check it out, because I think that's a great track. Elsewhere you've got like wibbly wobbly sort of keyboard sounds, and the vocal even sounds a bit like Fergal Sharkey from the Undertones at times. It's almost got a new wavy Psych feel, so in some ways they're ahead of their time. There's some lightweight disposable moments, a little bit of comedy Psych here and there, like the track Smoky Windows, which it's okay, but I could live without it. And then when you get the sort of pop moments, like on the track Diddley, even though it's a simple sort of spiky pop song, it's given a Psych sort of feel from production treatments like phasing and sound effects. So that's really worth checking out as well. Probably the highlight, or one of the highlights, is the last track on the first side, which is called Wind, which has a similar sort of melody to the Beatles' Because, and features harpsichord and a load of fuzz guitar. So check that one out. And then side B is taken up with one track, which is called Musical Journey, which you kind of know what you're going to get. Just that it's a sidelong track and they call it a journey. But it's a bit self-indulgent, I suppose. It's interesting. It has a frantic start with acid guitar and some stabbing piano. Has some big vocal harmonies, always a plus with me. And then there's some slower sections, again with piano and so on. There's many elements to it. Is it a song? Not really. Is it a musical journey? I guess so. And it is enjoyable. So I would check this out if I were you. I mean, this album works well for the most part. There are plenty of ideas on here. They don't all work, but they're all interesting, and I like the enthusiasm it's been done with. So there you go, the Paisleys and Cosmic Mind at Play. Now here's one that, if I'd had it sooner, because this was a recent pickup, it would have more than likely featured in my greatest Pomp albums of all time. And it's a one and done album by a band called Alpha Centauri. and this came out in 1977, and it's a pretty difficult album to track down. I've been after this one for years, and it's one of those albums that I wanted, despite the fact that, having heard parts of it, I was kind of aware of its limitations. And in much the same way as Steeplechase didn't make the cut because the keyboards just didn't seem to be central enough for a Pomp album, with this one, the problem I have with it is that the vocals aren't strong enough, and certainly the harmony vocals just aren't there. I mean, it starts off pretty well with a track called Hard Life, and that has a nice sort of synth and vocal intro. Not the strongest vocals, but some real upfront Chris Squire style bass guitar. And overall, the instrumentation has a sort of 80s neo-prog feel to it, I guess. But then it falls into a track called One Night at a Time, which is one of those tracks that seems to always trip up Pomp rock albums, which kind of betrays the band's origins as a barroom boogie woogie band. It really is a barroom sort of track, one of those band on the road type lyrics, with lots of piano, sort of honky tonk type piano. And I don't know why bands do that. This is on an independent label, so I doubt there was someone breathing down their neck saying, you know, do what you're known for, play your barroom stuff. That's a good time to show the label, I suppose. They were on the Salt label. Fairly unspectacular looking label, but you know, you can see what a kind of independent release that is. So yeah, the barroom element I don't like a lot. Definitely skip over that. There are some sort of Deep Purple, Boston sounding moments on this album. The track I'm a Rebel pretty much typifies that. You've got upbeat, poppy prog moments on here. Earth in Motion reminds me a bit of Lone Star. There's tons of fizzing synths on that. A really, really strong track. There's a huge keyboard intro on the track Love is a Curse. Pretty epic sounding intro. Lots of slide guitar, some David Byron-esque vocals. Not as strong as David Byron, but in that kind of ballpark, I suppose. And yeah, second track on side 2, You Shot Me Down. It's weird, it sounds almost like a Pomp rock Freebird the way it starts. Tons of Hammond organ washes on that, guitar histrionics, really nice sounding track. The album finishes on a bad note, really. There's a track called Make It at Rock and Roll, which has those typical lyrics. I think sample lyrics, something like, if we don't make it in rock and roll, we're not going to make it at all, or something like that. It's just like, well, yeah, you probably didn't make it at all then, because I don't think anyone in this band went on to, you know, huge musical success. And there is the band. And I love those sort of band photos where there's no sort of unified band image. This guy looks like he's just come from his job in the bank. This guy looks like he's wearing his wife's blouse. But I like that kind of amateurish naivety. So this rare album is cautiously recommended. I think it's one of those ones, it would be a fantastic album if they got rid of the barroom numbers, you know, 1, 1.5, 2 perhaps on here, and worked on their harmony vocals. It may have been down to budget restraints. They just didn't have the time to perfect those vocals in the studio. But it's an opportunity missed to an extent, but I'm still glad to have this album. Would it have got in my top 10 Pomp albums of all time? I'm not sure it would, but definitely a keeper. Here's an album that's been a real grower for me. I picked this up cheaply a few years back, and I'm surprised it's not taken off, really. I'm surprised it's not talked about more in the vinyl community. In part, might be the artwork, I don't know. But that's Old Paint, their self-titled album from 1971. And it's a really interesting album. It's It's kind of got a rural sort of Beatles, Badfinger, perhaps with a bit of Creedence Clearwater Revival sort of a feel to it. And it's been described as power pop at times, and I suppose, yeah, I've just said Beatles, Badfinger. It does have those elements, but it's not got that kind of real upbeat feel of a lot of power pop. There are flashes of acid guitar on here, which makes it quite interesting. I suppose I'd call it mellow rural power pop. There's plenty of acoustic guitar on here and piano. And like I say, it's a really interesting listen. There's a track, It's My Birthday, third track on the first side, which sounds like it's being sung from the point of view of a guy in the military away from home, presumably because of the date of the album, in Vietnam. And that's got some really nice sort of head nodding dynamics to it. All for Love has some acid guitar riffing, and it's a really upbeat track until the outro, where it just becomes this laid back jam. There's sort of Crosby, Stills and Nash harmonies in places, like I say, the acid guitar features here and there. There's a track, second track on side 2 called Victims of the Sex Revolution, which is a pretty dramatic ballad, which manages to cram quite a lot into its 3 minutes. Some great vocal harmonies on there. That's an interesting track. And then possibly the highlight for me is a track called Up From the Sea, which it almost gets proggy. Only slightly. I mean, this is definitely not a prog album. It's not necessarily a prog track, but it does have a sort of Wishbone Ash around the time of Argus feel to the guitars, a slight sort of Celtic vibe to the guitars. So yeah, this is definitely a pastoral, rural power pop album with some great harmonies, some acid guitar, and is worth checking out. My copy, I mean, you don't even see the sleeve. I'm not quite sure what is keeping that spine together because there's nothing left of it. And there's splits all over the place. But it's a hard album to pick up, particularly in the UK. So I grabbed it when I saw it, and I have no regrets. Old paint. Okay, I've kept the best till last. And that's an album from 1981 by a guy called Marianas. And it's called Visions from Out of the Blue. And I think the guy was from Massachusetts. And Marianas seems to just go by the one name, like Prince or Cher or Sting. Don't know anything else about him. On this album, he sings, he plays keyboards, plays some saxophone, and writes all the material. And this is a really, really interesting album. I guess you'd call it art rock. It's progressive. It's got a post-punk vibe to the vocals in places. Like I say, interesting stuff. I mean, the first track, the title track, sounds to me like Sparks. It's got that quirky art rock feel to it. I think it's worth going through the tracks one by one because there's a lot of variety on here and they've all got something to offer. I don't think there's any filler on this album at all. So like I say, Out of the Blue sounds quite a lot like Sparks. Change Is Gonna Come has a sort of arty post-punk feel to the vocals, some really angular guitars, icy synths, an apocalyptic guitar riff. I mean, fantastic guitar riff. And the overall feel of that track is pompy hard rock. And that's followed by Human Race, which is 7 minutes long. There's sort of Gary Newman-esque feel to the drums and synths. There's Mellotron in there, which sounds fantastic, washing all over it. You get Marianas playing some sort of squawking saxophone on here. And yeah, that track just sounds like Gary Newman doing prog. It's fantastic. The side ends with The Man from Another Planet, which has a sort of, I can only describe it, sort of Cold War, Eastern Bloc bunker acoustics. Really boxy and echoey and claustrophobic. And that's a great piece of art prog. Then side 2 starts with Prelude, which is just an instrumental. Apart from the fact it has these kind of Native American chants on it. But the best part of that track for me is these sort of nervy horror movie synths. Really, really good introduction to the second side. That's followed by Magical Man, which is kind of has a post-punk feel. Definitely post-punk synths on there. And it's kind of, if you could imagine a post-punk band doing a synth interpretation of a prog Meatloaf. That's a lot to take in, I know, but yeah. Fantastic stuff. Big vocal harmonies on the chorus on that. Really interesting track. Then you've got Ace Deuce, which is dark art prog. Lots of moody guitar and a chorus that's delivered like a child's nursery rhyme. And finishes with Someone Told You a Story, which is nearly 6 minutes long. And it's really discordant, off-the-wall art prog. There's some proggy Pomp synths on there. And they sound almost like Jean-Michel Jarre if he was taking some really bad acid. This guy had a unique musical vision. This is an excellent album. And you definitely need to check it out. Let me show you the labels. It was on the Jupiter Phonodisc label, which I assume was a tiny little label. But yeah, if you can track this down, you really should, because it is great. Really interesting album. I love the quirkiness of it. So there you go. That's some of the stuff I've been listening to lately. Some of the stuff that didn't make the grade in other videos. Hopefully you've seen something interesting. And I'll be back soon with some more. All right, take care. Bye for now.